In chapter 7, Job continues to respond to the advice and the instruction that he has received from his friend, Eliphaz. About halfway through the chapter, his attention shifts and he directly addresses God. Verse 11 seems to be the turning point. Therefore I will not keep silent. I will speak out in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. And from that point on, he speaks to God. Again, we, sat in the comfort of our own homes and not living in the crisis that Job is living in, we might be tempted to quibble with the way in which Job addresses God. But the fact that Job addresses God is a very good sign that we ought to hold on to and be encouraged by. In chapter 3, Job was speaking in general terms about the nature of life itself, how hard it is, how full of sadness and sorrow. In chapter 6, he's been speaking about his own situation, how he feels like he is under attack from God, but he's still not spoken to God, he's spoken about him. He does this, he does that, and he has done the other. But now at last, he lifts his eyes up to heaven and he talks directly to the living God. That might seem like a small thing, but it's really significant. Job knows that God exists. He knows that God can hear, and he knows that there is no better place in all the world to take our trials and our troubles than to the God who is in heaven. And that is what he does here in chapter 7. Still though, before he gets there, he spends a little longer sharing with us what the life of a man in the depths of misery looks like from day to day. The picture he paints here is pretty hopeless, isn't it? He gets up, he lives a day of pain and sorrow, he longs for the couch or the bed, he lies down and finds no freedom from his suffering, and then spends the night thinking, how long before I get up? The night drags on, he says, and I toss and turn until dawn. Are you getting a sense of his restlessness? At the same time, the total monotony and the apparent meaninglessness of these days that he is moving through. He speaks of a weaver's shuttle, which apparently is a tool used in the process of weaving fabric. It moves quickly from side to side, repetitively and monotonously. That is a picture of Job's days. Back and forth, but making no real progress, just going back and forth. And the only events that seem to mark his day is the sun coming up and the sun going down. During the day, he longs for the bed, and during the night, he longs for the sunrise. His life has been robbed of meaning. There's a fascinating paradox here in Job's experience of life. His days are swift, he says, like the weaver's shuttle. They fly on by. At the same time, the nights drag by, lasting forever. This, I think, gives us a picture of Job just being totally disoriented. Feels like the days are flying by with nothing at all going on within them. And it feels like the days are dragging on forever, and he will never be free from this misery. And all of this is going on within the heart and the mind of the same man at the same time, and it feels exhausting and disorienting even to read about, let alone to experience. Let me alone, he says to God. My days have no meaning. Job closes the chapter by asking that God would take his eyes off him, to stop looking upon him, to stop testing him, to stop examining his heart. Leave me alone, God, is effectively what he is saying. How can we not feel a measure of grief on his behalf for all that he is going through? Still though, the dark clouds of despair are completely covering Job's skies, but you and I, as readers of the story, we ought to recognize that above the clouds, the sun still shines. And there are glimpses down here of some encouraging truths breaking through the darkness of despair. Job knows that God is there, and that yes, God sees him and God even hears him. That is why he is calling out to him directly. Job knows that there is no advantage to pretend piety. There is no benefit in bottling up all this grief and putting on a kind of mask of religious respectability as if God does not know the real state of Job's broken heart. And so instead he is honest in the sight and in the hearing of the God that he still trusts. Sometimes grief turns people in on themselves. They don't reach up to God. They don't call out to him. They ignore him. They turn from him and they silently slip away. Job is a man wrestling with the worst, most awful realities, but he's wrestling. And how much better to wrestle and to fight and to falter, but to come back to God and re-engage all over again. How much better to do that than to simply ignore him and abandon him and turn away from him altogether. Job, though he does not let go of God, says, "God, let go of me." But the good thing is that God will not do that. Though things may feel impossibly difficult, the good news is that God is still present and he is not indifferent. He will not abandon Job to his sorrow and he will not let him go. What is true of Job back then is true of us today. When I fear my faith will fail, he will hold me fast.